Most people think financial problems are about not earning enough. But the data points somewhere else. Get a raise, spend more. Get a bonus, it's gone in weeks. The closer someone gets to stability, the more aggressively they seem to destroy it. That is not bad luck. That is a pattern. And patterns have explanations. The standard explanation for why people struggle financially is straightforward. Money is tight, costs are rising, wages haven't kept pace with inflation, and the psychological weight of financial stress makes long-term thinking difficult. These things are true, and the mainstream behavioral economics framing adds one more layer: loss aversion. The idea, developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the late 1970s, is that people feel losses more acutely than equivalent gains. Losing $20 feels worse than finding $20 feels good. The asymmetry is roughly 2 to 1. You have to gain about twice as much as you stand to lose before a gamble feels worth taking. The conventional application of this to personal finance is intuitive. Saving feels like deprivation, a loss, while spending feels like relief. So people spend. They discount the future. They optimize for not feeling bad right now, rather than building towards something that feels abstract and distant. The prescription that follows is equally intuitive. Automate your savings so the loss never registers. Make the good behavior frictionless. Remove the moment of decision. And that advice is not wrong, it helps. But it may be solving for the wrong problem, or at least for an incomplete picture of what is actually happening.
I'm hovering over a phone screen showing a banking app, motion blurred mid-decision.
Here's the part the standard framing tends to skip. Loss aversion predicts that people will resist losing what they already have. But the more interesting question is this: what happens when someone starts to accumulate something? When savings actually grow? When the account balance stops being frightening and starts being real? The standard model says that should feel like a gain, and gains feel good, and that should reinforce the behavior. But something else seems to happen. The accumulation itself becomes a source of anxiety. Not the losing of it in the abstract, but the having of it, the responsibility of it, the visibility of it. Rising bar chart, reflection Manhattan of loss aversion becomes too simple. Because loss aversion is typically described as about protecting the status quo. But what if the status quo, the identity someone carries, is one of financial struggle? Then accumulation is not a gain. It is a threat to coherence. It is a departure from a self-concept that has been stable for years, maybe decades. Buddhist psychology has a word for this kind of clinging: upadana. Attachment not just to things but to identities. We cling to a financial self-image. I am someone who is bad with money. I am someone who never has enough. Long after the original conditions that created it have passed, the label outlives the reality. And when reality starts to shift, when the account balance grows, when the margin appears, the mind moves, often unconsciously, to restore what feels familiar. The spending is not irrational in the ordinary sense. It is deeply rational, given the goal the system is actually pursuing: the preservation of a known self. Research published in 2008 in a peer-reviewed behavioral science journal examined loss aversion in capuchin monkeys. The monkeys were trained to use tokens as currency, and then presented with choices between a sure outcome and a gamble framed either as a potential gain or an equivalent potential loss. The monkeys showed the same asymmetry Kahneman and Tversky documented in humans. They were more sensitive to losses than to equivalent gains. The researchers noted this carefully. These are behavioral preferences, not statements about subjective suffering. We cannot read a monkey's inner experience. What we can observe is that the same asymmetry shows up across species in similar experimental structures, which suggests the mechanism is old. It is not a product of modern financial complexity. It is not a consequence of growing up in a consumer economy. It is a feature of how risk-sensitive nervous systems process the world. That matters. It means the bias is not a cognitive error that education can simply correct. It is baked into the architecture. But, and this is where intellectual honesty requires a pause, the Capuchin study measured loss aversion in a very specific context: choices between gambles with clear probabilities and immediate outcomes. Real financial life does not look like that. In real financial life, the probabilities are murky, the time horizons are long, The outcomes are uncertain, and the emotional meaning of money varies enormously from person to person. Translating a clean laboratory finding into a claim about why someone blows their tax refund every April requires several inferential steps that the data itself does not take. The evidence suggests the mechanism exists. It does not specify exactly how it operates in your kitchen when the bill arrives. There is also a layer that the behavioral economics framing rarely touches directly. For hundreds of millions of people raised in Christian cultural contexts, the relationship with wealth carries a moral charge that has nothing to do with loss aversion in the technical sense. Jesus spoke about money more than almost any other subject in the Gospels. The belief that wealth is spiritually dangerous, that it corrupts, that it distances you from what matters, is not a conscious opinion for many people. It is a money script absorbed in childhood, wearing the disguise of virtue. When someone self-sabotages financially, the mechanism may not be a fear of losing what they have. It may be a quiet, unexamined belief that having too much is wrong. That is a different problem, and it requires a different kind of noticing. So what does this mean for how you actually experience your own financial life? Consider the moment just after something good happens financially. A bonus arrives, a debt gets paid off. The savings account crosses a threshold that used to feel impossible. Notice what happens next. Not what you think should happen, but what actually happens. Is there a pull towards spending that feels like reward but might also be relief? Relief that the uncomfortable visibility of accumulation is reduced? Relief that the identity of struggle is restored? That pull is worth examining. Not with guilt. Guilt is not useful here, but with genuine curiosity. Because if the mechanism is the preservation of a familiar self-concept, then no amount of automation or friction reduction fixes it at the root. The automation just routes around it temporarily. The deeper question is whether the financial identity you are protecting still reflects anything real. Whether the story "I am someone who does not have enough" is a description of your current reality, or a description of a past reality that the present has quietly outgrown. That is not a comfortable question, but it is a more honest one than asking why you cannot stick to a budget. Here is the tension that does not resolve cleanly. The evidence that loss aversion is real and evolutionarily old is solid. The evidence that it explains any particular person's spending behavior is considerably less solid. The gap between a capuchin monkey choosing between tokens in a lab and a person clearing their savings account after a promotion, that gap is large, and filling it requires assumptions the research does not fully support. What seems more likely is that the mechanism is real, but the trigger is personal. For some people, it is loss aversion in the classical sense. For others, it is identity preservation. For others, it is something older, a moral script about what a person like them is allowed to have. The question worth sitting with is not which of these applies universally. The question is which of these is operating in you, and whether you have ever actually looked. The research behind this video draws from Journal of the Experimental Analysis of Behavior. Every claim traces to a published source. Full citations are in the description below. If the way this channel thinks about neuroscience resonates with you, subscribing helps this work reach people who'd appreciate it. New videos on the science of mind every week.